My name is Eleanor Marie Thompson. I am 76 years old, and if you are reading this, maybe you're curious about what happens to a woman when the ground beneath her feet crumbles. Not all at once, like in an earthquake, but slowly, like an old house groaning until the last beam gives way. I've lived a life of sacrifice, of swallowed words and promises made before God that only He ever heard. And it was on a bright blue morning in Springfield, Missouri, that everything began. Or maybe it began long before, when I still believed that a mother's love was enough to keep the world from falling apart. I remember the White House on the hill, with perfect clarity, the place where I raised my son, Michael. It was a modest home, with wooden windows that creaked when the wind came in from the west, and a front porch where I'd sit on Sunday afternoons with a glass of lemonade and bare feet. That house was my castle. It had no gold, no grand tapestries, but it held every ounce of love I thought I had to give. When Michael was born, I was young and full of hope. I was 22 and ready to give my whole heart away. Holding that baby in my arms, I felt as if the world could collapse outside my door, and I wouldn't flinch. Peace lived inside me now. My husband, Daniel, seemed enamored with fatherhood. For the first few months, but the shine wore off quickly. The truth was, he loved the idea of family more than the reality of it. Still, I clung to hope like a lifeline in a storm. What mattered was Michael. My boy was sweet, bright, curious. At 4, he asked questions about the stars. At 7, he told me he wanted to be an astronaut. I listened to his dreams with a smile, and the fierce determination to make them come true, even if it meant letting go of mine. I sold jewelry, sewed clothes for neighbors, baked cakes for money. Slowly, I built a safe, warm childhood for him. I shielded him from everything, even from me, my sleepless nights, my fears, the quiet desperation that often sat with me at the kitchen table. But life, oh life, it has its own ideas. I was 30 years old when I found out I was pregnant again. Grace came as a surprise that knocked the breath out of me. Michael was 8 by then, and had long been the center of my world. I felt guilt before I even told him, and somehow, though still a child, he sensed something was changing, and he didn't like it. He started pulling away, avoiding me. He told me I didn't need another baby, that he was enough. How could I explain to a child that love doesn't divide? It multiplies. Grace was born on a gray October morning, with wide eyes and porcelain skin. She was peaceful, almost angelic. I loved her instantly, but part of me never stopped worrying about Michael. The tenderness he once showed me turned cold, as if I had betrayed him. He threw tantrums, snapped sharp questions at me, sat through dinner in silence. He was only a child, I know, but the wound was already there, and somehow I had put it there. Still, I tried to balance everything with trembling hands. Time passed, and the White House on the hill echoed with giggles, cries, scattered toys. I worked double shifts, cooked what I could, made our home a sanctuary. Daniel, increasingly absent, fell into drink. He began sleeping elsewhere, coming home smelling of smoke and regret. And then, one day, he didn't come home at all. That night, with Grace in my arms and Michael hiding under the bed in fear, I looked around and realized I was truly alone. Not just without a husband, but without any other adult soul to lean on. It was just me, and 2 children. The years that followed were stitched with struggle, faith, and bone-deep fatigue. Grace grew into a brilliant, beautiful girl. Michael, now a teenager, drifted further into himself. I reached for him with words, with gestures, with love. He responded with walls. And every night I lay awake wondering where I had gone wrong. But the worst had not yet arrived. Now, when I look back, I believe that house on the hill was a character in my story, a silent witness. Its stairs groaned beneath our tired feet. Its walls heard my muffled cries. Its windows reflected the weariness in my eyes. That house knew. It watched me love, fall apart, and sew broken dreams with threads that were always too short, and on. That morning, yes, that morning, the one I still feel burning in my memory, everything changed. Michael looked at me in a way I will never forget. But that's a story for another time. For now, I want you to understand. Heartbreak doesn't come all at once. It arrives like a breeze, unnoticed, until it becomes a storm. And if you think, betrayal is just an ugly word, wait until you taste it. It burns on the way down. But sometimes, it's from that very fire that the strongest women are reborn. I used to believe that if I loved hard enough, deep enough, fiercely enough, I could keep everyone safe. I thought my love alone could shelter Michael from his silent anger and protect Grace from the fragility I started to notice in her eyes as the years passed. But I was wrong. Love is not always a shield. Sometimes it is simply a prayer whispered into the wind, hoping someone, anyone, is listening. Grace was delicate in ways Michael had never been. While my son ran wild in the fields behind our house, scraped his knees, and demanded second helpings of dinner, Grace moved through the world like a song, soft, almost trembling. She spoke in gentle tones and clung to me with quiet intensity. By the time she was 6, I had started to see the signs. The fevers that came too often. The way her skin paled beneath the sun. How she tired quickly, even after the shortest walks. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, just the sensitivity of a thoughtful child. But denial is a dangerous companion. It started with nosebleeds. Frequent, unexpected. Then bruises that appeared in strange places. Her spine, her ribs, the backs of her knees. I still remember the day I carried her to the clinic down in town, wrapped in her favorite blue blanket. I held her close the whole ride, pretending I wasn't terrified. Pretending I didn't already know something was deeply, heartbreakingly wrong. The doctor was a kind man with sad eyes. He asked questions I didn't know how to answer, then ordered tests that took longer than I could afford. We waited days for the results, though it felt like years. And then, on a Tuesday morning, the phone rang. I was in the kitchen, folding laundry when I picked it up. I remember the way my hands froze. I remember the exact words he used. "It's serious, Mrs. Thompson. It's leukemia." For a moment, I didn't breathe. My knees buckled and I sank to the floor. Grace came into the room, asking if everything was okay. I told her yes. I lied. Because how do you explain to a child that her own body is turning against her? Michael was 14 at the time, already distant, already retreating into a world where I couldn't follow. When I told him about his sister's diagnosis, he didn't cry. He didn't say much at all. He just nodded, turned around, and walked out the front door. That silence, it pierced me more than any scream. The next few months were a blur of appointments, hospitals, and cold rooms that smelled like antiseptic and despair. I sold what little I had left, my wedding ring, my grandmother's sewing machine, even our old piano. Anything to cover the bills. But it was never enough. There were so many nights I stayed awake, not from worry, but from the ache of helplessness. Watching Grace sleep with an IV in her arm and the echo of her brother's absence in every corner of the house. Daniel never came back, not even when I sent word about Grace. He had vanished into the kind of silence that doesn't leave a forwarding address. I had no one. I carried the weight alone. Grace, though, she was a miracle in her own way. Despite the pain, despite the medication and the exhaustion, she smiled. She would sing little songs to herself, sometimes humming while I brushed her hair. She asked me once, "Mommy, when I go to heaven, will it be like our garden in spring?" Told her yes. I told her it would be even better. But inside, I shattered. Michael stopped coming home some nights. He wouldn't say where he'd been. I knew he was angry, but I didn't know how to reach him. I tried. I begged him to help me with Grace, to be present, to understand that we needed each other. He told me I had chosen her over him, that I never loved him the same once she arrived. I wanted to scream, "I've given you everything!" But I didn't. I just stood there, listening to my son become a stranger. The day Grace died was unusually warm for late autumn. She had been getting weaker, sleeping more. Her voice, once delicate, had grown fainter. That morning, she held my hand and asked if I'd sing to her. I sang, "You Are My Sunshine," the song I used to hum when she was a baby wrapped in my arms. She smiled, closed her eyes, and just like that, she slipped away. There are no words for what followed. Just silence, just emptiness. I buried my daughter in a lavender dress, her favorite color. I placed her teddy bear in the casket beside her and whispered all the things I hadn't had the courage to say. Then I went home to a house that no longer felt like a home. Michael didn't attend the funeral. He said he couldn't. I didn't press him. I didn't have the strength. For weeks, I wandered through those rooms numb. The world kept moving, but I didn't. I couldn't. I made dinner but didn't eat. I washed clothes but didn't fold them. I breathed but I didn't live. And Michael, he left. One morning, I found his room empty, the drawers open, the closet bare. He left a note, but it was short. "I need space. I can't stay here. No goodbye. No apology." That was the day I knew I had lost both of my children. One to heaven, the other to silence. I sat on the porch of that white house on the hill, the sun rising over the fields, and I let the tears come, real, unfiltered, unstoppable. There was no one left to be strong for. But this is not the end of my story. It was perhaps the end of who I had been. But something else, someone else, was waiting to emerge from that grief. Not all at once, not loudly, but like a seed buried in cold earth, biding its time, waiting for light, and it would come, just not yet. When Michael left, he took more than just his belongings. He took the last thread of family I had left. The house on the hill, once filled with laughter and life, now echoed with silence. Each room bore the weight of memories: Grace's giggles, Michael's footsteps, Daniel's distant presence. I wandered through the halls like a ghost, clinging to the remnants of a life that had slipped through my fingers. Days blurred into nights, and I found solace in routine. I tended to the garden, though the flowers seemed less vibrant. I baked pies, though they remained untouched. I wrote letters to Michael, pouring my heart onto paper, but never sending them. The act of writing became my therapy, a way to process the pain and longing that consumed me. One morning, as I sat on the porch sipping lukewarm coffee, a gentle breeze carried the scent of lilacs. It reminded me of Grace, her favorite flower. I closed my eyes and let the memories wash over me. Her delicate hands picking blossoms, her laughter as she twirled in the garden. A tear slipped down my cheek. But for the first time in weeks, it wasn't solely from sorrow. It was a bittersweet acknowledgement of love, lost and cherished. Determined to find purpose, I began volunteering at the local library. Surrounded by books and stories, I found a semblance of peace. I organized reading sessions for children, their innocent curiosity rekindling a spark within me. Their questions, their wonder. It reminded me of Michael's early years, before the distance grew. Through the library, I met Margaret, a spirited woman with a penchant for storytelling. She introduced me to a writing group, a gathering of individuals who, like me, sought solace in words. Sharing my stories, my experiences, I felt heard and understood. The group became a sanctuary, a place where pain transformed into prose and grief found companionship. As seasons changed, so did I. The weight of loss remained, but it no longer defined me. I embraced new routines, new friendships, and slowly, the house on the hill felt less like a mausoleum and more like a home again. I painted the walls, planted new flowers, and allowed laughter to return, even if it was just my own. Years passed, and one crisp autumn morning, a letter arrived. The handwriting was unmistakable, Michael's. My hands trembled as I opened it, heart pounding with anticipation. The words were brief, a simple acknowledgement of time past and an inquiry about my well-being. No apologies, no explanations, just a tentative bridge extended. I pondered my response, the myriad emotions swirling within me: anger, relief, hope, and caution. In the end, I wrote back, sharing snippets of my life, the garden's bloom, the writing group, the children at the library. I kept it light, leaving the door ajar but not fully open. Our correspondence continued sporadically, each letter a step towards mending a fractured bond. Trust was not immediate, but the effort was there. I learned of Michael's life, his struggles, his regrets, his journey. He spoke of grace, of memories that haunted him, of choices he wished he could undo. Through our letters, we found a new rhythm, a cautious dance of reconciliation. It wasn't the relationship we once had, but it was something. A testament to resilience, to the enduring threads of love that, though frayed, refused to break entirely. Reflecting on my journey, I realized that rebuilding wasn't about restoring what once was, but about forging something new from the remnants. I had lost much, but in the process, I discovered strength, purpose, and a deeper understanding of love's complexities. It had been nearly 10 years since Michael walked out of my life without a real goodbye. 10 years of silence broken only by the occasional letter, always brief, always cautious. We had rebuilt a fragile thread of communication, like a paper bridge over deep water. I dared to believe, in the quietest corners of my heart, that one day he might come home, not for money, not out of guilt, but because he missed me, because he loved me. But life, as I've learned too well, doesn't often follow the script. We write in our hearts. It was a Wednesday, late afternoon. The light had that golden tint Missouri gets in the fall, when the leaves seem to glow from within and the sky feels too big to hold. I had just finished sweeping the front porch of the assisted living home where I now lived, not because I had no other options, but because, over time, I had made peace with change. I no longer needed the house on the hill to feel like myself. That version of my life had ended, and a new one had bloomed quietly in its place. There were friends here, people with weathered eyes and warm stories. I had a small room filled with books, quilts I'd sewn, and old photographs that no longer hurt as much to look at. I spent my days teaching knitting, baking during communal lunches, and listening to music from a record player someone had donated. My life was simple. It was enough. Then came the knock, 3 soft raps at the front entrance. I wasn't expecting anyone. My birthday had passed, and most of the residents were inside preparing for the bingo night. I opened the door, expecting a delivery, maybe a lost visitor. Instead, I found my son standing there. He looked older, thinner than I remembered. His hair was speckled with gray, his eyes lined with years he hadn't shared with me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air was heavy with the weight of all the words we had never said. 100 versions of this moment had played in my head over the years. Some ended in tears, some in embraces, none quite like this. "Hi, Mom," he said softly. I could barely breathe. "Michael." He looked around uncomfortably, then back at me. "Can we talk?" I stepped aside, motioning him in. We sat in the small parlor off the main hallway, a quiet space with large windows and the smell of lavender oil lingering from the morning's cleaning. He didn't look at me at first, just stared at his hands, fingers interlaced tightly. "I'm not here for long," he said. "Just passing through town." I nodded slowly, studying him. "Why now?" His jaw clenched, and he shrugged. "Things have been rough. I needed to talk to someone." Hope fluttered, fragile and foolish. Maybe this was the moment. Maybe finally he had come because he missed me. Because he regretted the distance. Because he needed a mother. Then came the truth. "I lost my job 6 months ago," he said. "Got behind on rent. My car's breaking down. I didn't know who else to ask." There it was. The room spun ever so slightly. Not from anger. Not even from hurt. From clarity. Cold and clean. After all these years, after all the aching silence and faded photographs, he had come. But not for me. Not for forgiveness. Not to say he remembered grace, or that he missed the scent of my cinnamon rolls, or the lullabies I used to sing when nightmares came. He came for money. I looked at him and felt the sharp crack of my heart, but this time, it didn't break. It opened. "Michael," I said quietly, "I'm sorry you're struggling. I truly am. But I can't help you with money." He blinked, surprised. "What?" "Mom, I don't have what you're looking for. Not anymore," I said. "Not because I don't love you, but because I've spent a lifetime giving until there was nothing left of me. And I can't do that again." He leaned back, mouth opening, then closing again. There was no anger in his eyes, only shock, maybe shame. I thought, "I know what you thought," I whispered. "You thought I'd say yes, that I'd rescue you again. But I've rescued everyone my whole life. I rescued your father when he lost himself. I rescued you and Grace from hunger, from loneliness, from the cold. I buried my daughter. I buried my dreams. I've given everything, Michael. Everything." He stared at me, and for the first time in decades, I saw something flicker behind his expression. Not guilt, not pity, recognition. Maybe, just maybe, he saw me as something other than a vessel for his needs. "I'm not angry," I continued. "I'm just tired, and I finally love myself enough to say no." Silence settled between us. Heavy, final, but not bitter, just honest. He nodded slowly, stood up, and looked around the room, as if seeing it for the first time. "You seem okay here." "I am." He hesitated by the door. I don't know what I expected. Neither do I. And then he was gone. I didn't cry. I didn't collapse. I didn't feel triumphant either. Just clear, solid, whole. That day wasn't just the end of something. It was the birth of something else entirely. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving. I was choosing. Choosing peace. Choosing dignity. Choosing me. After Michael left that day, the world didn't stop. The sun didn't fade. The birds still sang outside my window. Life moved forward, gently indifferent to my aching clarity. For a long time, I sat by the window of my little room in the assisted living home, watching the wind stir the branches outside and thinking of all the women I had been in this lifetime. A mother, a wife, a caregiver, a fighter, a forgiver. But somewhere along the way, I had forgotten to be one more thing. Me. It's a strange thing to look back and realize how often we build our lives around others. We become so used to putting others first that when there is no one left to serve, we stare into the quiet and wonder who we are without them. That was my moment. Not when Michael asked for money, not when I said no, but the hours after, when the door had closed, the silence returned, and I looked at myself in the mirror, not as a mother, not as a grieving woman, but as Eleanor. Just Eleanor. I barely recognized the woman staring back. Her hair, once raven black, now curled in soft silver waves. Her eyes, still blue but gentler now, carried years of stories. Her shoulders were curved but not broken, her hands worn but steady. There were laugh lines, tear lines, worry lines, every crease earned. For the first time in decades, I studied myself without judgment. I took in the woman who had walked through fire and emerged, not untouched, but tempered like steel, stronger, clearer, more herself. I thought about how much of my life had been defined by roles I didn't choose. The abandoned wife, the mourning mother, the forgotten parent. I had lived so much for others that I had left myself behind in the dust of their needs. And yet, here I was, still breathing, still standing. That night, I pulled out my old journal, the one with the worn leather cover and the gold-edged pages, and I wrote a single sentence at the top of a fresh page. I am not a tragedy. And then I kept writing. I wrote about the way Grace used to hum when she brushed her teeth, about how Michael once brought me a bouquet of dandelions and said, "They're magic, Mom, you just have to blow the right way." I wrote about the time Daniel danced with me barefoot in the kitchen, before the drinking, before the distance. But I also wrote about the loneliness, the crushing silence, the disappointment. I didn't hide from the shadows anymore. I had lived them, survived them. I let the words pour out until I had filled 12 pages. And when I closed the journal, I felt something shift inside, like the closing of a chapter I had tried to rewrite for too long. That was the night I decided to truly live for myself. It began with small things. I signed up for the watercolor class Miss Judith offered on Tuesdays. I hadn't painted in over 40 years, but my hands remembered. With each stroke of the brush, I felt color returning not just to the paper, but to my soul. Then came the music. Old jazz records borrowed from the community library, Ella Fitzgerald, Louis Armstrong, Billie Holiday. I played them every afternoon, letting the notes wrap around me like a warm shawl. Sometimes I danced alone in my room, eyes closed, remembering the girl I used to be. One morning, I helped organize a tea party for the residents. I wore my mother's brooch and a wide-brimmed hat I found in a donation box. I laughed, not the polite, practiced kind of laugh, but the deep belly kind that surprises you. And I noticed something. When I laughed, others did too. It was then that I realized I was no longer just existing. I was creating a life. People began to come to me, not for what I could do for them, but for who I was. Miss Clara, who had lost her husband the year before, started joining me for morning walks. Young volunteers from the local college began asking to hear my stories. Even the staff began calling my room Eleanor's Corner, as if it were a little oasis of calm. And slowly, I stopped needing to tell myself I mattered. I simply knew I did. The pain of the past never truly left. There were still nights when I held Grace's teddy bear and let the tears come. There were still mornings when I looked at the empty space in my photo frame where Michael should have been. But those moments no longer defined my life. They were a part of it, like shadow. To light, background to melody, I began to dream again. Not the big, sweeping dreams of youth, but quiet, purposeful ones. I wanted to finish writing my memoir. I wanted to visit the botanical gardens again. I wanted to feel the ocean breeze one last time. I was no longer waiting to be remembered. I was remembering myself, and in doing so, I was becoming whole. Not because someone came back to complete me, but because I realized I had been enough all along. There's something remarkable about growing older, not in the slowing of the body, but in the sharpening of the soul. As your skin softens and your hands tremble, your spirit strangely steadies. You stop pretending. You stop apologizing for your truth. And when you finally speak, it's not to impress, it's to connect. That's how it began. The unexpected unraveling of my story in front of strangers, who would soon become something else. Witnesses, friends, sometimes even mirrors. It was Margaret, of course. She had been after me for weeks to share more of my writing with the little reading group we had started in the community room on Thursday afternoons. I always offered excuses. Too tired, too busy helping in the garden, too unimportant to matter. But one rainy afternoon, when the wind howled through the trees and the halls felt particularly still, she looked at me and said, "Eleanor, someone out there needs your truth to survive theirs." That sentence stopped me cold. So the next week, I brought my journal. I didn't read from it. Not at first. I sat in that familiar chair in the corner, watching the others sip tea and shuffle pages, and I simply spoke. I told them about the girl I once was, the house on the hill, the birth of my children. I spoke about the joy of Grace's laughter and the hollow echo left when it disappeared. I shared my mistakes, how I clung too tightly to Michael, how I built a world around him without leaving, space for him to be anything other than mine. I told the truth, and I didn't look away. When I finished, the room was silent. No clapping, no polite nods, just stillness. And then Margaret reached over and touched my hand. "You survived," she whispered, "and now you're teaching us how." That was the beginning of something I hadn't expected. People began to ask for more. Miss Clara, who barely spoke during meals, left me a note saying, "Your words helped me sleep last night." Thomas, a retired professor with fading memory, told me I reminded him of someone he loved once. Someone strong enough to bend, but not to break. I was asked to speak during a community storytelling event at the local library. At first, I declined. The idea of standing in front of strangers, laying bare my scars, felt like too much. But then I thought about Grace, how she once said, "Mommy, I think stories are how people find each other." And I realized I had spent most of my life hiding behind resilience, afraid that sharing my pain would make others pity me. But now I knew better. Truth is not weakness. Vulnerability is not a crack in the armor. It is the opening through which light enters. So I stood behind that podium, heart trembling, and read from my journal. I spoke about motherhood, about loneliness, about the day Michael came back not with love, but with need. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't sanitize it. I simply told it. Some people cried, some smiled. One woman stood up and said, "I thought I was the only one." That, to me, was everything. The truth had finally done what I never could alone. It connected. From that day on, storytelling became my offering. Not performance, not therapy, but invitation. A way for others to look inside themselves and see they weren't alone in their hurt, their endurance, their quiet triumphs. The staff at the care home started calling me Miss Eleanor the Story Keeper. A few of the younger nurses would pop into my room during breaks and ask questions about the past. One of them, a bright-eyed girl named Hannah, told me she wanted to be a writer and asked if I'd read her poems. I did. They were lovely and messy and full of life, just like I had once been. And somewhere along the way, I stopped thinking of myself as a woman at the end of her life. I began thinking of myself as a woman still writing it. One day, I pulled out a blank notebook, not the journal I used for memory, but one for something new. Across the top of the first page, I wrote the title in firm strokes. The day my son broke my heart, and how I learned to mend it without him. It wasn't a story of revenge or bitterness. It was a story of love, unreturned, but still freely given. Of pain, yes, but also of healing. It was my testimony. I don't know who will read it after I'm gone. Maybe no one. But the act of writing it was enough. It said to the world, and more importantly to me, I was here. I lived. I mattered. And for the first time in a long time, I began to dream bigger. I asked the staff to help me sign up for a digital writing workshop. I wanted to learn how to share my story online. Margaret teased that I'd become an influencer, and we laughed until we cried. But deep down, I knew it wasn't about followers or recognition. It was about legacy. Because our stories, the real ones, the hard ones, outlive us. They become breadcrumbs for someone else's journey, and mine was just getting started. There are moments in life that arrive like a shadow at your doorstep. Soft, quiet, but unmistakably present. I was folding a lavender-scented sheet in the laundry room when Miss Clara came in, holding a pale blue envelope in her hands. "It's for you," she said. Postmarked out of Arizona. I knew before I even touched it. My fingers trembled not from fear, but from recognition. Only one person still addressed me in that spidery handwriting. Michael. The last time I had seen him in person, he'd walked out of the nursing home doors with a bowed head and empty hands. He hadn't written since. That had been almost a year ago. A year in which I had rebuilt the scaffolding of my life. A year of morning walks, storytelling circles, painting sessions, and deep, healing laughter. Still, my heart raced as I sat by the window and carefully opened the envelope. It wasn't long, just one folded sheet of paper, creased twice. There were no greetings, no "Dear Mom," no "Love, Michael." Just a paragraph, direct, unexpected. I've been thinking a lot. About Grace. About you. About that day. I didn't handle it well. I know that. I don't know what I was expecting. But the truth is, I think I was looking for someone to save me again. You always did. I guess I never asked what it cost you. I don't know how to say I'm sorry. But I am. And I hope you're doing okay. That was it. No return address. No signature beyond the name I had once whispered over cribs and stitched into the hems of little jackets. Michael. I read it 3 times before folding it back into its envelope. Then I just sat there, watching the shadows of tree branches sway against the window pane. The Eleanor of 5 years ago would have clutched that letter like a lifeline. She would have written back instantly, filling the page with warmth and hope and soft edges. She would have reopened her heart again and again, until there was nothing left of it. But that Eleanor was gone. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even disappointed. I was still. The letter didn't break me, nor did it thrill me. It simply existed, like an echo of something once urgent, now distant. That night, I took a long walk around the grounds of the home. The wind was brisk, the scent of dry leaves swirling in the air. Autumn was slipping into winter. I felt it in my bones, but not in my soul. My soul, oddly, was spring. When I returned to my room, I took out the letter and placed it in a small, wooden box I kept on my dresser. It wasn't a box for keepsakes exactly, more like a time capsule of truths. Inside were photos of Grace, a few of my old writings, the small silver cross my mother gave me as a child, and now, this letter. Not because it meant everything, but because it meant something. The next morning, I read a passage to the storytelling group. It wasn't about Michael. It was about memory, how we carry it, how we curate it, how we sometimes must learn to let go of the version of people we once loved. After the session, Hannah, the young nurse who had become something like a granddaughter, to me, asked if I ever thought about seeing Michael again. I looked at her, smiled softly, and said, "Sometimes, but only when I forget to remember why I stopped waiting." She nodded. She understood more than her 20-something years should allow. In the weeks that followed, I didn't wait for another letter. I didn't imagine reunions or long apologies. I didn't rehearse what I'd say if he ever came again. That chapter had been written. Now, I was focused on the pages ahead, and there were many. I began drafting my memoir in earnest, no longer just in journal scribbles or short readings, but as a complete work. I called it The Quietest Strength. The title had come to me one night when I watched Miss Clara, fragile and grieving, help a new resident find her way to dinner. It struck me then, some of the most powerful acts are the quietest. I wrote every morning with a ritualistic rhythm. Peppermint tea, Ella Fitzgerald, on the record player and the soft scratch of pen on paper. Each page felt like reclaiming something. Not just memory, but meaning. As I wrote, I allowed myself to be honest about everything. Daniel's slow unraveling, the loneliness of motherhood, the ache of outliving your own child, the complicated love for a son who hurt you and didn't know how to mend it. And most of all, I wrote about what came after the breaking, because no one talks enough about that part. The after, the part where you're supposed to pick up the pieces of yourself without instructions or applause. The part where healing isn't loud or linear, but soft and slow, like the way snow melts into spring. One afternoon, Margaret sat beside me, in the garden, and asked, "What do you want people to feel when they read your story?" I thought for a moment. The breeze played with the edge of my cardigan, and then I said, that it's never too late to find yourself, that even the most broken-hearted among us can still learn to live. She nodded, and we sat in silence, two women with full lives behind them, and somehow, so much still ahead. When I was younger, I believed that your story only mattered if someone told it for you, that it had to be grand, loud, carried by others to count. But now, sitting here in the late season of my life, I know something I didn't before. The truth doesn't need a stage, only courage. And courage, I discovered, is often found in the simplest moments. The local college had partnered with our assisted living home for a project called Living Histories. It was part oral history, part digital archive. They sent student volunteers to interview residents about their lives. At first, it sounded like a lovely gesture, a bit of validation for people too often forgotten. But when the coordinator, a kind young woman named Elise, asked me to participate, I hesitated. "I'm not sure anyone needs to hear mine," I said. She smiled gently, patient. "Actually, Eleanor, they do," I agreed, though quietly unsure of what I'd say once the camera was on and the room turned still. We scheduled the recording for a Tuesday morning. That night before, I barely slept. I reread parts of my journal, flipped through old photos, held Grace's teddy bear for a while longer than usual, and when morning came, I put on a soft blue sweater, the one with pearl buttons, and pinned my mother's silver brooch on the collar. I brushed my hair carefully, as if I were preparing for something sacred. Maybe I was. Elise and her crew were respectful, gentle. They asked about my childhood, my family, my marriage, and slowly the words began to come. Not rehearsed, not dramatic, just real. I told them about the house on the hill, about how I used to watch Michael sleep and wonder what kind of man he'd become, about Grace's laughter, how it echoed long after she was gone. But the moment I truly felt the shift, the moment I realized something inside me had changed forever, was when Elise asked, What do you want people to remember most about? Your life? I didn't pause. That I kept going, even when no one told me I could. It wasn't just about survival. It was about choosing to live well, even when every reason told me to close my heart and shut the door on the world. When the interview ended, Elise hugged me. "Your story will help so many," she said. I smiled, but deep down, I felt something bigger stirring. Not pride, not even relief. Just peace. In the weeks that followed, Elise sent me a copy of the recording. She also shared it online, as part of the Living History's digital archive. I didn't think much of it until Hannah came bursting into my room a few days later. "Eleanor, your video. People are watching it. It's gone kind of viral." I blinked at her. Viral? Like a flu? She laughed so hard she nearly dropped her tablet. No. Like, people online are sharing it, talking about it. It's beautiful. That evening, with her help, I watched the video on her tablet. There I was, older, yes, lined and silver-haired, but still me. And the comments beneath the video poured in like tiny waves of grace. "She sounds like my grandmother. I wish I'd asked her more about her life." This made me call, "My mom, thank you, Eleanor." I didn't know I needed this until I heard her say, "I kept going." "Please tell her. She matters." I sat in silence after reading them. The girl who once thought she was invisible had become a lighthouse for strangers. The staff at the care home began asking if I'd be willing to do a small book reading. So we arranged a modest gathering in the community center next door. Chairs lined up, coffee and cookies in the back, and me, holding a copy of the printed pages. From the quietest strength, I was nervous, not because of the crowd, but because of what I was about to say. Because now I wasn't just speaking for myself. I was speaking for every woman who ever felt invisible, for every mother who ever ached in silence, for every soul who thought their story didn't count. I began by reading the chapter titled "The Day I Said No," the one about Michael, about the moment I reclaimed my voice. I expected tears. What I didn't expect were nods, understanding ones, empathic ones. And at the end, people lined up just to hold my hand. "I left my son's house last year," one woman said. "He doesn't understand my worth. You reminded me I still have it." Another whispered, "I lost my daughter too. I never talk about her. But maybe I will now." I wasn't healing alone anymore. I was creating a space for others to speak their truths too. From that day on, I gave myself permission to live out loud. I started a small writing circle for other residents. I recorded short video messages about grief, memory, and aging that Elise helped me post online. People began sending letters to the care home, strangers writing just to say, "Thank you for surviving." Each message was a reminder. My story didn't end in pain. It began again in purpose. And more than that, it reminded me that legacy is not measured in monuments, but in impact, in the way our words become bridges for others to cross. There's something honest about aging that no one really prepares you for. You begin to feel time not as a ticking clock, but as a soft rhythm, like waves brushing the shore. Constant, calm, inevitable. You wake up and notice how morning light hits your skin differently, how your steps have grown more deliberate, how even silence feels like a full conversation. I think when you're young, you imagine the end of life as this dramatic, final note, a door slamming shut, or a storm sweeping in. But it's not like that. Not at all. It's a gentle loosening, a quiet letting go. The truth is, I'm not afraid. That surprises even me sometimes. But after all I've been through, after losing Grace, after Michael's silence, after saying no for the first time in my life. I've learned that fear is not the enemy. Regret is, and I've made peace with mine. Some afternoons, I sit outside on the stone bench beneath the maple tree in the courtyard. It's the tallest tree in our garden, old and wise. In fall, its leaves burn red and gold. In winter, it stands bare and still, as if listening. I like to sit there and think. Not about the past so much anymore, but about what remains. I think about Grace's smile, about how I see echoes of her in every small kindness around me, in Hannah's patient care, in the quiet way Margaret folds blankets, in the sound of piano keys drifting from the rec room down the hall. I think about Michael, not with bitterness, but with acceptance. He never wrote again after that letter, and maybe he never will. That's something I had to surrender. The idea that closure comes in a neat package. Sometimes it comes in silence. Sometimes in knowing you did everything you could, and then choosing to live anyway. Some people ask me now if I believe in reconciliation. I do, but not always with people. Sometimes it's reconciliation with your own story. That's the harder part, in truth. Learning to forgive the woman you were, the mistakes she made, the love she gave too freely, the dreams she buried so deep they forgot how to breathe. I used to think I had failed as a mother, but I don't anymore. I mothered with everything. I had. And when there was nothing left, I gave even more. But motherhood isn't about perfection. It's about presence. And I was there. In every scraped knee, every sleepless night, every whispered prayer at the edge of a hospital bed. That counts for something. Maybe for everything. I still write. Not every day, but often. My book, The Quietest Strength, is nearly finished. I'm not rushing it. Some stories deserve to be told slowly, like a hymn. When I do finally close the last chapter, I think I'll send a copy to the address Michael used when he mailed me his letter. I don't expect a reply. I just want him to know I found peace, and that I loved him, even through the silence. Last week, Elise brought her daughter to visit. A sweet girl, no more than 6, with curious eyes and a loose braid. Her name was Lily. She sat beside me and asked, "Are you a grandma?" I smiled. I am. I just never got to be called one. She thought about that for a moment, then took my hand. "Can I call you Grandma Eleanor?" I nodded. I'd like that very much. And just like that, something in my heart softened. A title I had never claimed, finally offered, freely, with love. That night, I lit a candle in my room, not for loss, but for presence, for the woman I am, for the journey I've walked, for the quiet courage it took to keep walking. I know I don't have endless seasons ahead of me, but I don't need them. What I have is enough. Enough laughter, enough stories, enough love. And when my time does come, whether next month or in 10 years, I want people to remember not just the trials I survived, but the joy I chose anyway. I want them to say, she kept going. Not because she had to, but because she finally wanted to. Because that, I've learned, is the real grace in life. Not in never falling, but in rising again, soft, whole, and undeniably yourself. There's a particular quiet in the early hours of the morning, before the clatter of coffee cups in the dining hall, before the shuffle of slippers down the corridor, before the nurses come in with their soft greetings and careful hands. It's in that stillness, when the light begins to gently touch the edge of my curtain, that I feel the most alive. Strange, isn't it? At 76, I feel more rooted in myself than I ever did at 20 or 30 or even 50. I have fewer years ahead of me than behind, yes, but I no longer measure life in years. I measure it in clarity, in peace, in mornings like this. They've begun calling me Miss Eleanor the Storyteller around here. It started as a joke, but now it's more than that. I've become someone the residents come to when they want to remember something, or forget something, or simply be reminded that they still matter. Last week, a new resident named Walter moved in. Widower. Retired railroad worker. His hands shook when he first came down to dinner, his eyes scanning the room like a man looking for a lifeline. I invited him to sit next to me. We talked about peaches. Not politics, not pain, just peaches. How they taste better if you eat them outside. How the juice runs down your wrist if they're ripe enough. That's all it took. By the end of the week, he was smiling again. That's the beauty of what I've learned. You don't have to do big things to make a difference. You just have to see people, hear them, hold space for their stories, even when they don't know how to tell them, especially when they don't know how. I finished my book last month, The Quietest Strength. I typed the final sentence at my desk by the window while the leaves outside turned the color of fire. I cried when I typed the period, not because it was over, but because I had done it. I had taken all the heartbreak and silence and buried pain, and I had turned it into something that would outlive me. Elise helped me format it for publication. We uploaded it online as a free ebook. Nothing fancy. I didn't want money. I wanted meaning. Within a week, we'd received emails from women all over the country. I thought I was alone. Your words helped me speak to my daughter again. I haven't written anything in 20 years, but today I started. Each message a tiny miracle. Proof that the deepest wounds, once spoken aloud, can become bridges instead of scars. I never heard from Michael again. That letter, the one where he said he was sorry but didn't quite know how to say it, was the last. And I've made peace with that. I still hope now and then. But I no longer wait. That's the difference. I love him. I will always love him. But I no longer need his validation to feel whole. And Grace. Sweet Grace. I dream of her sometimes. Not the sick version, but the laughing one. The girl with wind in her hair and lilacs in her hands. In my dreams, she's always dancing. I don't know what dreams mean, if anything at all. But I like to believe she visits me in those moments, to remind me that some loves never leave. A few days ago, Hannah asked if I was afraid of dying. I looked at her for a long time before answering. No, I said. I've already done the hardest part. What's that? She asked. Living when it hurt. She nodded, tears in her eyes. We didn't need to say more. I don't know when my last day will come. But when it does, I hope someone plays Billie Holiday in the background. I hope someone lights a lavender candle. I hope someone opens the window just enough to let in the breeze. And I hope someone reads my story. Even if just one chapter. Even if just one sentence. Because I was here. I loved fiercely. I lost deeply. I fell apart. And I rebuilt myself, with shaking hands and unbreakable will. I said no when it mattered. I said yes to myself, finally. I turned the ashes of one life into the soil of another. I mattered. And if anyone ever wonders who Eleanor Marie Thompson was, let them read this. Let them know that even the quietest woman in the smallest room of the oldest building had a voice, a life, a fire, and she used it.